we're going to talk about qualitative research methods. We're going to spend considerable time during week 2 talking about qualitative methodology, which is inductive in nature and very different from a quantitative approach. Although the majority of the course will focus on a quantitative approach, it's very important that you have a good understanding of qualitative methodology. I think this is a very helpful graphic, this table, and there's also an expansion on this in the lecture notes. But you can see the differences between a qualitative and a quantitative approach. There are a few key things to remember. Qualitative work is inductive in nature. Quantitative work is deductive in nature. Qualitative work is theory generating. Quantitative work is theory testing. In quantitative work, you have a hypothesis, you're testing it, you have identified variables in most cases. In qualitative work, you're really looking at a holistic approach in terms of depth, context, meaning. You're looking at why and how. The objective is not to generalize the results to population. You're not as interested in sampling in most cases. Many times it's exploratory and the design kind of unfolds. You're looking at the content of the data, looking for trends and patterns, and the researcher is the data collection instrument. You are the person who's collecting data, whether as an observer, an interviewer, a participant, a whole host of factors.
The question becomes, when do you use a qualitative approach and when do you use a quantitative approach? And really your research question should guide your choice. And the choice may be situational depending on what it is you're studying and the design of the research. Theoretically, it's very beneficial to use both types of research or a mixed method approach, but this is a very complex process and can be quite detailed and comprehensive in scope. There are many different ways to gather data from a qualitative perspective. And you'll notice what most of these have in common is it's based on words. In a qualitative paradigm, words are the data as opposed to numbers.
There are many ways to collect data within the qualitative paradigm. One primary method is through the interview process. There are very many different types of interviews, from the most informal and unstructured to a very structured format. And it depends on the research question, the interviewer, and the type of data that you want to collect, what approach you will take. But you will notice that the focus here is on words, not numbers, not quantifying data, but on words or content and themes. Oftentimes, when an interview is conducted using a small group of people, usually between 6 to 8 people, you will hear the term focus group used. Focus groups are typically a homogeneous group of people. They usually don't know each other, but they're chosen on the basis of the research topic. For example, if we were going to conduct a qualitative study looking at programs designed to prevent teens from drinking and driving, we would want to choose people for the focus group that were similar in age, gender, ethnicity, to the targeted group. So if you want to know if a program is effective for teens, you wouldn't necessarily use seniors as a part of the focus groups. Focus groups have been used for a long time. They're a very rich source of information. The focus is not necessarily on each participant's individual experience, but rather the interaction between the participants. That is the interest to the investigator. There are some real assets or advantages to interviewing people face-to-face, especially people who might be ill or may not be able to come to the phone or don't have access to transportation. If you interview them face-to-face, you can get a richness and depth to the interview that perhaps you cannot do in any other way. And it certainly makes it clear who you're interviewing, that is their responses. You're able to clarify, you're able to read the facial expressions. So it gives you a lot of information when you conduct an interview face-to-face. Some of the disadvantages to the face-to-face interview are, of course, the time and money involved. Some people may see it as retrusive, and it also may be difficult to follow up with face-to-face interviewees. Of course, one of the most popular historically has been the telephone interview, where you get a kind of a combination of the face-to-face and the impersonal self-administered questionnaire. You don't actually see the person, but you are able to clarify, to probe, and ask further questions. And it's also inexpensive, convenient, and very safe for the interviewer. Of course, one of the real disadvantages today to the telephone interview is that there are many no-call lists. It's hard to get telephone numbers. It's hard to get people to respond if they're screening their calls. Some people may not have a home phone. They may use their cell phone, and you may not have access to those numbers. So those are things to consider when you think about what type of interview you want to conduct. And if time, money, and resources are not an issue, then you may want to consider doing a focus group and a survey so that you're able to collect quantitative as well as qualitative type of information on your area of study. An example of this type of work was done related to the outbreak of the West Nile virus in 2003 in Colorado. And the researchers used 11 semi-structured focus group interviews, and they recruited through community gatekeepers for participants. And the purpose is really to explore and contextualize why people chose to use or not to use repellent when there was this outbreak of West Nile in Colorado. And what they found through these interviews was a host of reasons for why people chose not to use repellent or chose to use repellent. And this is the type of information that they may not have been able to obtain if they had used a self-administered type of instrument. So it goes to show how important it is to consider what type of information you need and the best way to go about obtaining it.
In summary, in a nutshell, there are 5 aspects of qualitative research that make it distinct from a quantitative design. These are that it is naturalistic, the data are descriptive, not numbers but words, pictures. There's concern with process, not with outcome, but the process. It's inductive in nature, and meaning is the goal. So it gives us a tool to really investigate a holistic picture of what's going on, the why and the how, and obtain information that you wouldn't necessarily be able to obtain from a more quantitative approach. We're seeing more and more in the literature a mixed method approach where you use a qualitative and quantitative design, which can become really complex, but it's a great way to think about this.
And here's a list of references for further study and consideration. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation on qualitative research methodology.